You are listening to the oneofusnetp28258 podcast network. One of Us is a podcast and video network funded all but entirely by donations and subscriptions. We do accept pitches for audio-based or banner ads, but on a case-by-case basis. If you are interested in that, contact us at oneofusnet@gmail.com. With the amount of audio and video content we generate, it is expensive and extremely time-consuming to keep things running. Please go to the webpage oneofus.net and sign up for a subscription at $2, $5, $10, or $25 and get a ton of bonus content. One of Us needs and appreciates all your support. This movie review also comes for subscribers at Time Lord level or above, an uncut, unedited, longer video version of the review. Become a subscriber and check it out. Hungry for adventure? Then travel to a la carte, the charming land below the floating city of heavenly delight, and join the young cook Ramen for her daily dose of wacky hijinks in the new series Delicious. With a cast of eccentric, strong female characters, this wonderfully illustrated comedy comic will be out in July, but you can pre-order now by clicking the banner on the page for this podcast. Get the limited hardcover first edition, plus free stickers and an art print as a gift. Wow, stickers! A perfect gift for your child, or those of you who are forever young at heart. One of Us strongly recommends this one.
Long ago in the land of myth and legend, the one great Buddha faced upon an evil monster and then went, actually, I don't want to deal with this right now, and went to the one next door. And in it saw two eyeballs. One was black and red, and then it changed to green and golden. The translation's kind of iffy is what I'm saying. And ripped out these eyes in a very un-Buddha-like fashion. But one of them decided to play hopscotch down the road, hopping from person to person until it finally hit the not-so-virgin priest Luwayne.
I mean, what was I supposed to do?
And with it, Luwayne went on his evil, murderous rampage of hopscotch until finally the Buddha, played by Robert, decided to put it back in its jar.
I was supposed to be silent, but I'm going to go ahead and, for the sake of moving the plot forward, I'm going to go ahead and speak. And yes, all that.
And with the other eye, gold, green, blue, multi-technicolor Joseph's Dreamcoat eyeball got put in another jar. And neither these two shall meet until Mindy, that is me, went to get some cookies and accidentally used the wrong one. And so now, in order to put this eyeball back in its rightful place, we must do the review of The Eighth Night, a Korean mystery thriller horror involving myth and legend, much of which us non-Buddhists probably don't get correctly. So, would anyone among us want to jam the eyeballs back in their containers by giving the synopsis?
Sure, why not? The Korean version of Indiana Jones decides he wants to prove the legend that you recited was true.
Well, I messed up the legend on purpose, so you may want to say what it actually is.
There's an interdimensional monster that wants to cause human suffering. Buddha's like, psh, no,
Bitch
don't
hack.
do that. But for whatever reason, can't actually destroy the creature. So he basically plucks out its eyes and, as you described, separates them in two different places, and so that keeps the creature blind and powerless, except that some guy decides he wants to prove the legend, so he finds the eye and things get loose, and it begins doing the fallen angel thing from person to person to person through the path it's supposed to take. And you've got a cop who's investigating one of the murders that happened, and you've got a novice monk who's supposed to go get the other experienced monk and convince him to come save everybody, and they all are chasing this thing and each other, and it probably makes a lot more sense if you speak Korean, which I don't. But the stepping stones, or the hopscotch that you referred to, are the 7 people that the creature will inhabit along its path, and when it reaches the final one, then the virgin shaman, once they reach that last one, then it will burst forth and be powerful and destroy the world and all the things that, those creatures want to do in the process. That's pretty much it. And then we watch them fight each other and this thing, trying to keep ahead of it, and it keeps getting ahead of them and so forth and so on. And like I said originally, the dude that starts this all off was trying to prove the legend was true. There's a fucking interdimensional monster that wants to murder all of us. Why would you want to prove that that's a thing? Just leave it alone.
Yeah. I mean, there's fame and fortune, but yeah, that was one of my thoughts too. It's like, you want to prove this monster that's going to destroy humanity is real? What? So, how'd y'all feel about this one?
It looks really good. It looks really good. Particularly some of the visual stuff they do, like in the storytelling, but in some of the other stuff where they desaturate the visuals and you just have pops of color, like the red and the black and some of that stuff. It looks like a movie, like genuinely cinematic in a lot of it.
I think there was, on that tip, some stuff that kind of remind me of television.
Mm-hmm.
Like some real up-close zooms for reaction and stuff like that you wouldn't necessarily get in a movie. And I dug that because at the 2 hours... I will first off tell you one of the reasons I really dug this movie. As someone who constantly bitches about the lacklusterness of third act exposition, there's more story in the first 10 minutes of this movie than a certain franchise that's about to get its 11th film, I think. Or 10th. I'm not going to tell you which one it is. One of them's got 10, one of them's got 13. Which one? Yeah. But on that note, it made me feel a lot of times we get these horror shows that are 6 or 8 episodes or films where it's like, oh, I wish this one was the other one. Right. I love this kind of in the middle. I'm not saying it plays like a television because you're absolutely right. A lot of the stuff was so well shot. The lighting, the stuff in the train station that we get to see reminded me of a lot of stuff from The Similars, just that it was, real low to the ground type stuff, that building atmosphere, keeping the tension where they need to. I loved the way that it looked. I thought it was a really good choice to not, we're in Korea, but we're in the alleys, we're not driving around the city with the highway behind us, which a lot of films will do to build scope. But this was definitely a story-driven horror movie.
I will say that was part of it that kind of was a bit of a negative for me, because one of the things about this film is it sets up in that, very well done exposition at the beginning, establishing the legend, is that there is a ticking clock.
Right.
There is a sense of urgency as this evil eyeball jumps from person to person to person. And while it does say that, it does it in days, or nights, that it's jumped, and it will say third night, fourth night, because the focus is on the dude and the monk and a little bit on the policeman, there isn't the focus on what the eyeball is doing.
Right.
And so there isn't as much of a sense of urgency until the final act, which is 45 minutes, half an hour before the end.
Yep.
That I thought was beautiful. I loved the pacing. I loved the visuals. I thought the action was really good. But before that, it felt kind of draggy because it felt like more focus should be on the threat instead of the people trying to catch up with the threat.
There was a lot of cuttings to the bodies afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, we heard about another one. The one thing I will say about that semantically that really bugged me is it's called the 8th night and we're counting the days. Couldn't we have just counted the nights instead? It would have been a little more coherent, I think. But I also think, to what you're saying, Mindy, it probably would have flowed a lot better if we were just talking about the stones and not the days.
Right.
South Korea isn't a massive country, so I'm pretty sure he could run across it in 8 days and kill some people. Right. I will say one thing that I really dug about the language of it, because, obviously this is a subtitled foreign film, Korean produced. I love that their idea of Far East and Far West is like the Middle East and their West Coast.
Yeah.
Right.
But our version of Far East is so far west that it's the other side of the world.
Yes.
Right.
But their Far West is like the edge of Korea. It's
Right.
just up there in the mountains.
Yeah, well, Buddhism began in India, so
Yeah,
I was
right.
thinking it's probably around there. And then Korea, and it's like, yes, this is our borders, and it's like, it's really tiny in comparison to the rest of the world.
Because I was like, oh man, we're going to South America or something. It's like, no, it's like that side of the island and, 2,000 miles that way.
One of the things that I did find sort of interesting about it, especially as you get near the end and you start seeing more of a manifestation of the creature, some of the, what I assume are visual effects, they would almost have to be, of like the eyes. It's not just the one eye or the two eyes, but like...
Yeah, we get a pretty good final boss reveal.
Yeah, and I'm gesturing toward my face, which nobody can see unless they're paying the extra money. You should pay the extra money and watch the video. It's much better.
Thank you, subscribers.
Yes, thank you.
So, yeah, the one shot that I really like once we're in Act 3 is once, we're finally all in and, it's finally going down there at the end with the spells and the traps and the double crossing and the confusion and the family drama and all this stuff. This really quick kind of flash of like a light in the clouds. That shot is fucking gorgeous. Like, it is really well. It's really quick. It's not a lingering, they didn't open a title on that, but I really, really appreciated that.
Well, we have talked a lot about the visuals. What did everybody think about the characters and or actors who played them?
I think it's cool if you're like a person that watches a lot of horror and stuff. You get all kinds of tropes in here, man. We got a cop. We got the cop's sidekick. We have a monk. We have a crisis of faith, no longer a monk. We have someone who's lost their family. We have someone else who's lost their family. We have family that doesn't know that they're family. We have people that may or may not really be in this real world that we're following through part of the story. Yeah. So I thought that was neat. I thought a lot of the play that, it reminded me of stuff like The Seventh Sign and stuff like that, where we get to see like the possessed person jump in on the protagonist and be like, it's me now. Like, I dug that part of the writing and stuff. So I like that a lot of the characters got to play more than one side, I guess.
Sure.
There's just a lot going on. So I think for me, the characters were cool. I dig the first monk that we start with that we don't get to, see for the entire movie. But I think everybody was definitely in a lane. There's not a lot of similar arcs and stories in the thing to each other.
Yeah, I think that maybe they had a bit too much. Maybe they cut one of those plot lines and focused more on those, storylines, then maybe could have found a way to intertwine them together. Because except for, there's one moment between the cop and the ex-monk that kind of involves some intertwining, but then it deviates once again back into their own lanes. It is very much, this is my story, this is my story, this is my story, and then end. So, yeah, it would have been nice if they had interconnected more. Again, that would have helped in regards to the threat, because it's like everybody's focused on this one thing. You heighten the threat level, sure. It becomes a bit more engaging.
I mean, this begins with a Buddhist legend, or at least this movie's version of a Buddhist legend in Sanskrit. So you have this cop going through it all, but your primary characters are the monk and what you described as the one who's lost his faith, right? Mm-hmm. So the cop is doing all the cop stuff, and he's just sort of dragging along behind everything and kind of periodically catching up. And it's the two guys who are operating more or less on faith that are the ones who have to resolve everything at the end. And in fact, the nature of one's faith versus the other, or gaining or losing it, is what makes the final difference in the conclusion of it, which was interesting. And I'm not saying that they didn't need the cop thing at all, because I think it has some interesting elements within it. It brings in some other sort of threats to what's going on. But this is a supernatural threat that's going to be resolved essentially with a supernatural response. It's not going to be some dude with a 38 or whatever the Koreans carry that's going to solve this problem for them. And so that was kind of an interesting thing, because we're so used to, particularly in the Western horror, that it is, well, frankly, some derivation of Christianity that's going to save the day when it's a supernatural creature. The supernatural threat may or may not be part of, the Christian mythos, but the guy who's going to solve it with his superpowers is going to be. And so it was interesting to see this. I mean, I know part of it is the side effect of where it is. It's Korean as opposed to American. But it was just interesting to see a different representation, because there's really not a lot of the power of Christ compels you or power of Buddha compels you. It's a completely different method of dealing with this threat supernaturally, I guess. So I thought that was an interesting element to see, and it's one I like seeing, not because I have any particular interest in faith, but it was just interesting to see not the Catholic dude again waving a cross and a Bible fixing it.
Yeah, I thought one thing that's neat is, not giving anything away. The monk that we end up following at the heart of the story, not being his younger counterpart that came from the original one, but he's the crisis of faith, left the religion, coming back. We didn't spend an act with him either coming back to God. He's like, I'm back on this now. I guess I couldn't escape it, fate type thing. He doesn't dwell on any of that.
Right.
Well, he does have a moment, because his arc is not about his lack of faith.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
It's about overcoming his trauma.
Right.
I'm just glad that they didn't spend 20 minutes on that, like a lot of films usually do. The one thing, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but most of these films where you get the cop that doesn't know they're in a horror movie, we get the inevitable team up. And I will just say that this is not that.
No. Not in the slightest.
No.
As we all laugh with glee.
Because I had some questions, I think, going into the final moments of the movie, and I feel like, some of the characters did too.
Yeah.
That's another thing is, there's a lot of cast in this movie, and it's really a ride to see who's around for the credits.
Right. And that was one of the things too, is like, this thing is 2 hours long, but some of those side characters, like the cop's buddy and the virgin shaman and, the professor, there are side characters that there's a lot going on with them, but because the focus is on monk and ex-monk, and there's stuff with ex-monk as well. Obviously I mentioned his trauma, but it's like there's a lot of stuff there that I really wish had gotten expanded upon, because it's like this is very clearly character moments that it feels like they had to cut a bit in order to carry on with the plot. And again, since I mentioned the plot kind of dragged until the last act, having those character moments, I think, would have been a nice journey to go on through it in order to keep it going.
Sure.
I did think about it and wanted to ask y'all if there's smaller element over the others you'd like to see expanded on. Because, like, say we get a expanded universe movie, I'd fucking love to see this meditation group.
The meditation group with the professor.
I almost paused the movie to daydream about how nefarious that fucking idea was.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to know more about the professor and his daughter and what the deal was there, because she just kind of shows up and has a whole bunch of mystery about her, and it's like, I'd like to know some of that mystery. Yeah. No? Okay.
That'll be for the 9th day.
Oh, right.
When that one comes out. Or 9th night. I'm sorry.
9th midday.
I was going to say the 9th tea time.
And so, as we get into the 9th day, how about we get into our final thoughts? Go ahead, Robert.
I dug it. This is easily one of the best horror releases by Netflix for me in a while. There's been some really good ones. I really like it because it's different. I really like it because it's pretty much a horror drama at some point. You get a cop that doesn't know he's in a horror movie, like I said. You get a crisis of faith. There's a lot of stuff I don't want to say because of what happens in the third act, but I really like the way it looked, like Loane mentioned, and I totally acknowledge what Mindy's talking about the jumbledness. I think maybe it has to do with that weird 2-hour mark. Like, you've either got a lot of story and you had to cut some stuff out, or you needed less time to tell it. This one, for me, I had never heard about this till it looked like we had a shot to review it. So I was hyped. I hadn't seen a newer horror movie that I hadn't heard anything about in a while. I dug it. I'm going to give it a strong 8 out of 10. Blood amulets, man. Like, fuck, I want to hear a story about her, too. Like, it was some cool stuff. I will say one thing that's neat, real fast, is seeing a villain fall for the same shit more than once is my cup of tea, man. Because that was cool, too.
Nice.
And how about you, Luann?
From a technical standpoint, it looks good. It sounds good. It's got a lot going on visually. It's not boring to look at any point. From a Western viewer standpoint, you've seen a lot of this before, but there's a lot of stuff you haven't seen this way. And that makes it that much more interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it was really spoilery, but it got a lot into the sort of how the ending is resolved to some degree. You should still watch it anyway. But it was just interesting to see it not from the sort of traditional Western supernatural threat lens, right? Like, that in and of itself was worth my time watching this movie. I'll probably watch it again because I'm pretty sure there's some stuff I missed that I'm hoping I can catch. In the end, this is 3.75 out of 5 Virgin Shaman.
Yeah, as they were saying, this film is really beautiful. I mean, I always love Asian film and TV in particular because it does tend to be shot well and the visuals tend to be really pretty and interesting. And I did enjoy everybody in it and what they brought to the table. But as I said, because of the way that the story structure is, you have characters that don't really interact all that much. Their storylines don't really interact all that much. And there are some characters where you get a glimpse that there's something really interesting and deep and engaging about them, but it doesn't go into it. And so as a result, like I said, until the final act, it does feel draggy. It's like you enjoy your time with the people, but there's a lot more storyline that I wish we had gotten that we didn't. But it's still, an interesting story. And like I said, once it gets to that last act, it just goes. And it is really good. And it looks awesome. And some of the things that happen, you're just like, okay. Nice knowing you. So I'm gonna give it 7.5 prayer beads that you wrap around your fist like iron knuckles, because you gonna beat some shit up. Send them demons back to not Nirvana, because that's where good people go. That is one thing. It's like, I'm with you, Luane. I love the Eastern sort of mythos, legends, supernatural stuff. So having that there, and it's like, eat this from the Buddha, which is so not the Buddha when you really think about it.
Yeah, there's a scene where the monk who reps his knuckles with the metal beads gets a gun pulled on him, and he reps his knuckles. I was like, if he blocks that fucking bullet with his fucking hand, I'm gonna petition for a sequel. Luckily, it didn't go to, this isn't an experimental horror.
He just had his axe that had Om written on it, so It's like, meditate on this, bitch!
And that's the American remake right there.
The American remake is definitely an HBO half hour called Virgin Shaman. I'm sorry. I did think about that. Like, the character gets called that from when she's very young. Like, is this like a position that people take? Or, like, does every town have, like, oh, I'm not going to the bougie shaman, I'm going to the Virgin Shaman? Like, is it... Lots of questions, which I think if a film's going to keep you talking, it's good. So, good things.